You're somewhat of a creative. You focus on music,
Yeah.
PolyMantra music, which I have to say I love, and for the listeners.
Thank you. It's nothing that you can easily relate to something you've heard before.
Can you tell us about the style and how the music came about?
I came across a piece of electronic equipment some years back, a sequencer, and it has a keyboard, and I don't play keyboards, but what it did do was allow me to create music that I couldn't otherwise create on the guitar. And back then I wasn't a great guitarist anyway, and I was like a 3-chord punk guitarist, but the sequencer gave me the ability to compose, I guess, and to layer instrument voices on top of each other. And as I got used to the technology, I started to understand what the opportunities were that it was opening up to me. So I refined it a lot. And it started off as a hobby just for me. But then I opened up and started playing with a couple of other musicians, and gradually it evolved. But basically, it's just an echo of the music that I hear in my brain all the time. And it's a distillation, I think is probably the best word, of the musical style and the music sounds that I guess that I love. So you actually hear some Beethoven in it, and some Tchaikovsky, and Sex Pistols, and blues, and funk, and a lot of I like jazz fusion, so I'm quite a big fan of that. So I've tried to inject a fair bit of that, but I do like that psychedelic surreal tinge that I can get with my music now, and a lot of that is down to the technology that's available that wasn't available when I was a young chap.
I feel a real Doors feeling.
Stanley Owsley Stanley III, I think he was the guy that was back in the 60s, was the sound engineer for the Grateful Dead doing their live performances. And he came up with this concept of these huge setups of PA, and like how to properly project a live band to an audience. And up until then, it had been like a makeshift arrangement where people really didn't, like the band even didn't understand how they sounded out front, whereas the Bear did. And he cultivated their sound to the point where Grateful Dead became the iconic band that they are still today. But he also was a chemist, or something of a chemist. He initially started off as a dancer, believe it or not. But he found his way into being a little bit of a chemist, a background chemist, and allegedly, and I say that because I don't want him to be exhumed and arrested posthumously. He came up with a formula for LSD that turned out to be the LSD that turned on most of San Francisco and the hippie generation, which is a huge. It's like being the guy that invented beer. It's a huge thing. And from that, like there was this whole group of Kinsey and, Timothy Leary type people who were experimenting with LSD, and they came across a counterculture movement that was heavily focused on music and art at the time. And he introduced the LSD to a lot of these people, and it just expanded everyone's minds. And the Grateful Dead turned into the band that they are now remembered for being because of that. And he ended up living in Herberton, of all places. And part of the reason, well, there are a number of reasons. One of them was to escape prosecution, I think, back in the States. But the other thing, he was fair dinkumly believing there was an ice age coming, which is like counter the global warming. And he moved his family up there. And he set up a house, really elaborate off-grid setup with diesel generator. He was a very, very clever guy, very clever, scientifically and all sorts of things. So he set up this place, and I got to play. He used to have a birthday bash once every year, as you do with a birthday. I got to play at one of them, and it went for about 3 or 4 days. And these American musicians and other international musicians would be there, and they sort of flew into the country quietly to get up to Herberton and take part in this 3 or 4 day festival. So it was great. I really, really enjoyed it. I really value that experience musically and culturally as one of the highlights, I think, of my artistic connection. It was great.
Wow, go North Queensland.
Oh, yeah, a lot of people don't understand that or don't even know that happened here.
You've been diagnosed with bipolar type 2, ADHD and OCD. Do you mind telling us about the symptoms of each of these conditions?
Well, I think most of my life, I realized that I was a bit different, but I thought mostly it was controllable quirkiness and, sense of humor and ability to see the world differently to everyone that I could turn on and off. But it came to a point where I couldn't turn it on and off. And I think the peak came when I was the regional health and safety manager for a federal government department up here. And I got to the point where I couldn't interact with other people, and a lot of them are senior people down in Canberra and whatever, because the federal government. I couldn't interact with them without annoying them, which is, in reflection, it was quite funny, but not to them. So I had a lot of complaints, and long story short, I ended up having to go on sick leave on and off for a number of times, and I would sort of have these mini breakdowns where I would just stay home and basically stay in my bedroom for weeks on end. And then I'd come back to work and have another go, and then I'd break down again and annoy everyone. And eventually I ended up going to, I think I went through 6 different psychiatrists because I wasn't happy with the initial diagnosis of, oh, you're bipolar, because I thought that's a really throwaway line that people, I want someone to really spend some time with me to really understand what's going on. But that's where we ended up. And it seems to fit. I don't let it define me, but it does come in handy sometimes as an excuse if I offend someone. I don't intend to offend people, but I say things that are really silly sometimes. And not everyone understands that it's my sense of humour. Some people, and particularly when I was working for the federal government, in a teleconference, and you would say something about some woman's fat bum or whatever, and everyone would just be horrified and go red and cut me off. And
believe me when I tell you, I am feeling your pain, brother. I empathise.
It's.
But you think of the implications as a really quick diversion, and I want to bring it back to how this impacts on your creativity, because from my understanding, it's not all bad. But you think of the hypersensitive times that we live in now, and the irony, in fact, how it's like, oh, we're really inclusive, we're going to include everyone and everything, but if you say anything wrong at a meeting, you're a bad person, you're going to be cancelled.
Right. It is. It's
you think of how you can't have those two mutually exclusive concepts.
Look,
you can't.
You only can in fairyland.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would like to live in fairyland.
For you, it hasn't been all bad from some of the conversations that I've had with you. So there's been some positive impacts on your life.
Look, that's correct, Nat. I think that if I put aside the difficulties I had working in a structured organisation that had rules and regulations and expectations that I couldn't meet, I forget what it was, like 6 years ago, when I was declared to have this psych disability that made me unfit to work, and it took me out of those places. I could pick and choose who I guess spoke to and what I said. As a musician, and I've never really considered myself to be a musician until a few years ago. And one of my numerous ex-wives said to me, Steve, you're a musician. That would explain a lot of your behaviour. But also you need to own that and be a musician, not be someone that nibbles around the edges of playing guitar or doing whatever and pretending to have a go, but then not doing anything for 6 months, which is what I did for a while. I did a couple of serious attempts at music, and I entered a couple of couple of my tunes into a competition overseas, which was called, I think, the Academia, something or other awards in America. And I won 2 international awards. I thought, all right, well, maybe she's right. I need to be a bit more serious. Lately, I have been a lot more serious, and my practicing in my guitar and the work that I'm doing with my composing. But in terms of how the OCD and the bipolar and the ADHD fit in, the bipolar takes me in and out of these dark places and occasionally elevate me into these stupid places. And when I'm in that deep, dark place, I really don't do much. I sit quietly in my room, maybe read, or even if that. But when I come out of it, I bring with me these thoughts and feelings. And I don't necessarily immediately sit down and make a song up about it, but I carry them as part of my psych makeup. So when I'm writing a song, I will bring a sad or a disturbed mood to a song because I'm trying to bring that out musically. I would never, ever compare myself to people like Tchaikovsky or Beethoven or Scriabin or, those people. But on a very clumsy, basic scale, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm bringing this is what it feels like to be in a deep pit of depression. It's not about something made you depressed. It's a thing that just drops on your head, like out of the blue. When I come out of that, I bring that with me. And when I'm ready to sit down and start composing, and I don't do it anywhere near as much as I think I should, but when I do, that comes with me. Then comes the ADHD part is not great in terms of trying to compose music or playing live. It really hampers me because I have trouble focusing and staying focused on what I'm doing when I'm playing. And even simple stuff like putting all my equipment together and plugging the leads on becomes very difficult. And people that come to see the PolyMantra play, or even you look at the videos, you can see me, I'm just looking around, I'm distracted all the time. That's the ADHD. I can't seem to keep things in focus. But from a music perspective, it does allow me to drift my music out from where it started into a different place and then bring it back. And then the OCD comes into play. And I'm not a freak of cleaning by any means. When I'm composing music and I start to lay it down, I go back and revisit this stuff hundreds of times to get it note and pitch perfect and rhythm perfect. And even now, stuff that I wrote 10 years ago, I go back and fine tune it. So I guess I'm lucky that with the technology I have, unlike some of those older style musicians who wrote it down on a manuscript and there it stayed, I can go back and change stuff all the time. So that side of the OCD is really handy because when I come to play this stuff live with Daniel, the vocalist, I know that it's perfect. I know exactly what's going to happen. So then as a guitarist, I can just go off on my own tangent and know that that music is there behind me. And I know when to come back to it. So yeah, it does help.
Would you mind telling us about your creative process? So what do you do? Like, you want to write something, can you discipline yourself into doing it? Is it something where you've got to just wait to go through this process, wait for the
it's got to be, it's got to be the right time. What I tend to, because the piece of equipment that I use mostly is a Yamaha RM1X sequencer. And I think Yamaha probably owe me like $1 billion in royalties and product endorsement for saying that. But this is a piece of equipment that's got a keyboard, but got all this weird stuff. And it's hard for me I can't master it. And I don't want to, but I can do some stuff with it. But the process allows me to start off with a basic melody that I might lay down with the keyboard. Say, for example, as a bass line. And I might come back to that in a week or two and think, I'm going to add some keyboard to that, or I'm going to throw in some saxophone or a bit of synthesizer. So the piece of equipment allows me to do it in my own time, which is very important for me because I can't work under pressure to come up with a product in a day. So that's like my process though, is I start with something and I think that sounds a bit like such and such, maybe this will work, and I'll add something to it. And then I'll try something else and add that to it. And then I'll keep revisiting it. Sometimes like I'll wake up at 2 a.m. and come and sit down here in my studio and work on it again. And it seems to, at some point, it seems to take a life of its own. It's almost like it's telling me where it wants to go.
It's really funny because I've spoken to quite a few creative people now, and there seems to be this mixture between revelation and evolution. So a little bit of the creative spirit that does really genuinely feel, and I think you'll empathize with this. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it's you. It's like a voice from above or something else has come into you. It's not really you, but then you grab hold of it and you evolve it.
Yes.
It's kind of like you mold it. It's like, maybe an analogy would be a bit of clay, mentally speaking, comes into your head. Yeah. You can't help that clay. It's like you're the spinning wheel and someone's throwing the clay on you, the spinning wheel, but then you reach your own hands up and mold the, and that's how I feel. And
look, Matt, I think you nailed that. I think it's exactly that. And it's not this sort of spiritual wanky sort of stuff about being channeling stuff. It's just that your brain is firing all these ideas around, and at some point they funnel into a pattern that says, hey, here's something you should write down or something you should do musically. What I think one of the things I really love about the music, once I put it aside and I've composed all the backing, which is like bass lines and stuff, when I get to play it live with Daniel, the vocalist that creates with me, we then get to improvise over the whole lot. So every time we play this stuff, it's different. So it's not just channeled, you must play it like this, like a cover band, for example. It's here's a framework to work in. Now weave your magic. And I think for me, the beauty of the PolyMantra music that I'm composing, and when we do play it live, is just the sheer joy of improvising and working with another creative soul who's on the same wavelength and coming up with this really interesting mix of music.
Tell me about your co-creator. There's an interesting backstory to that.
It is, because Daniel is actually a psychiatrist. And it's sort of like if I had termites, he was a pest exterminator. But in my case, he's a psychiatrist. So, and I don't ask him to put me on the couch and talk to me. But what I think what happens, and he's much younger than me. He would be like, a third of my age, Daniel, and he's a lovely guy, and he's very, very creative in his own right, and he's recorded an album and he composes and does all this stuff. But because he's a psychiatrist, I think he has a tendency to be able to look at the music that I'm saying, how we ever go with this, break it down and find where he could inject something interesting to it. And it would be like, I spend my life in psychiatrist's office, and what they tend to do is they get you to talk about something and then they just say, oh, and this and that or whatever, and they inject a little bit of their own thought process. I am totally confident in everything that Daniel suggests. And he not just brings the vocals, but he's added lyrics, he brings melody, and he's brought my music to a completely different place to where I originally placed it. It's very interesting process. It's and we're very comfortable with bouncing this stuff off each other. The fact that he's a psychiatrist, I guess, is handy if I, on some respect, but I never really, I don't trouble him to ask advice, but his analytical mind and his ability to look at the different and understand these differences has been very, very valuable. Very valuable indeed.
And obviously he'll be able to put things in perspective too. So if he sees you doing something on stage, rather than getting upset that you're, not appearing to focus. You go, oh, that's what's happening with him right now.
Perfect. That's a perfect example, Matt. He's that. He's empathetic.
Let's move on to the Cairns Fringe Arts Convergence.
Yes,
because
please.
You're one of the people that's one of the driving forces behind it. So tell us about the Cairns Fringe Arts Convergence. Who, what, when, where, why, and why we should go and see it.
Well, the Cairns Fringe Artist Convergence was quite a mouthful. Came out, there are two things. One was, I was really trying to create a venue or an event where PolyMantra would fit in, because the music we play is quite surreal, and it's not pub rock, and it's not the sort of music that attracts the punters that come in and want to dance and whatever. But we know it's great music, but it's very frustrating that venues won't hire you. And Elixir is one of the few, Elixir Music Bar, is where the event is, one of the few venues that actually give us a go regularly, so we go in and play. But originally I thought, wouldn't it be great to not think of musicians and painters and photographers as separate, but think of their style and their approach to art as being something that binds them together. So I thought, what if we brought people together, like artists together, and said, create something surreal. Now, if you're a painter, show me some of your surreal painting. If you're a musician, let me hear some of that. If you're a performance artist, let's hear some of that. And just initially speaking to people, there was just so many people out there that had this artistic bent, I guess, for the surreal that they couldn't find an outlet for anywhere. No one really wanted to hear the weird stuff they were doing. And eventually I had enough people that I thought, well, why don't we put an event together that says artists are artists. Doesn't matter whether they're playing a bongo or they're creating a sculpture or they're holding a camera. It's art. And the thing that they have all in common is that they're creative spirits. And all they really need is a focus. And I thought, let's make the focus the surreal, because I love the surreal. Let's make that a focus, but in all other respects, it's open to everyone. I was a little bit disheartened by some of the events and promotional stuff that I saw that said we were looking for artists of a particular gender or race or ethnicity or whatever to do this particular exhibition that was only going to be about their ethnicity or their gender. And I said, no, to me, that's not right. This is about art and artists. And I don't care what you look like or who you are or where you come from. I'm interested in your art. That was a pure concept that I wanted to create an event that brought artists of all different types together, but they did need a common theme. It would be silly to say you'd have some landscapers and some portrait artists and whatever. It would be a schmozzle. So I said, let's all have one common objective, to create something surreal.
So 26th of March at the Elixir Bar. What time?
Starts at 5.
Which one of your songs do you enjoy playing live the most?
I have to say that I enjoy playing Licking Acid from the Bear's Paw the most. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is that it's got this, it evokes this memory for me of being up there, and also of my ex-wife, Deb, who I'm still very, very good friends with. But I also get to play some really psychedelic feedbacky guitar, which I just, as a young guitarist back in my day, that's what we all wanted to do. We all wanted to sound like Jimi Hendrix. And you don't always get the chance to do that.
They're kind of like this.
That's it. Yeah. That's good. That's an Elixir.
And it's true though. Like you can feel Hendrix.
Yep.
You can feel Hendrix. You can feel the Doors. You can feel the Grateful Dead. You can feel
exactly what we're trying for with that song. Lately, because I've been very involved now with painters and photographers, for example, putting together this Cairns Fringe Art Convergence. And it really has brought home to me the similarity in the process, the creative process. And even though a painter is using their hand and a brush and a piece of paper, they're putting down the same thoughts and feelings that I'm doing with my music. And the more I'm involved with these other artists, the more I'm thinking this is just a brilliant idea to put us all in one space. Believe it or not, a lot of the artists, the painters, have said, why don't we just make it a private gig? We don't invite other people in. We just have a great night, and we paint and we play music. And I thought, perfect. It's like Andy Warhol used to do at his factory back in the day, before he was dead.
Well,
I think it's a perfect idea.
Well, they're not mutually exclusive. You could have the guys, if they're in the zone.
You're right, Matt. And look, you go and watch a movie. It's photography, it's cinematography, it's performance, it's writing, it's music, it's special effects. And it comes together seamlessly to create this experience that you sit there and you're transfixed, unless it's like the crappy, the series they had on Netflix about Britney Spears. But other movies, good movies, like Apocalypse Now, it's this huge exploration of all this psychological stuff, and there's Doors music going on, but it seems to make sense to put them together. And I thought that's what we'll get happening here.
Well, there's only two more questions I'm going to ask you before we wrap it up. We've gone over the highs. Mate, are you happy to discuss a low?
Look, I've had Queensland Health Suicide Watch coming to hover over me, when things got that bad. And I've had those times where, as much as I've wanted to stay at work, and I really did, because I really enjoyed the work I was doing, I just couldn't. And that's a really defining moment for any person, that you realise you're not able to earn your own living. It's, if you're a truck driver and you've been blinded, or if you're a manual labourer and you lose your legs or whatever, it is very confronting, because it identifies who you are. So that was a very dark time for me, and it lasted a number of years. And, I've got to look, there are people who, I imagine there are billions of people across the planet that watch your show, Matt, and some of those people will identify with this. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
You have to go through that stuff. It's not the end, it's a dip. We all have dips in our lives. Some people's dips are different than others. But for me, it marked, I think it took me a number of years to identify that this means a change for me. And it took me a number of years from then to make the change. So medication and, ongoing treatment with psychologists and psychiatrists. And, they're all great. But at the end of the day, you understand that you're not going to cope without all this other assistance. And it can be a bit confronting when you understand that you need that to continue to be a person, to be a useful person.
Wow. Well, kudos to you. I mean, kudos for you for surviving it, and kudos to you for coming to that recognition, and kudos to you for channeling it into this really positive way. Seriously,
I think a lot of people do. Honestly, Matt, I think there are a lot of people that channel their mental anguish, or the being not quite the same person as the rest of the crowd.
Yeah, not in the bell curve.
Different ways to channeling it. Some people channel it through, being violent, even as an extreme.
Yeah.
They'd say, well, I don't fit in, so I'm going to bash everyone. Other people just become recluse and sit in their room. But there are some of us in the middle ground that say, okay, I've still got enough of me, bit of that brain, that I can channel this. And then you start to see some positives. And there is nothing positive about having a disability, but there is a benefit sometimes in creating out of that dark place. People, as a species, humans don't evolve unless we try different tangents. And some of them lead to fierce warriors, and some lead to artists, and some lead somewhere else. But you have to accept that it's an experiment, it's an ongoing experiment.
And again, it's not the creative process, it's that mixture.
Because there are some states of mind I get into, and some of them are about, drinking and other substances, where I actually hear music, and not just hear it, but I can orchestrate it. So I can say, oh, I want to hear a bass line now, and I now want to hear the string section come in, and I want them to play this melody. Now, I know that not all of that is coming out of my brain, because my brain is just not that clever. So I'm channeling something. And I think all artists, to a really great extent, the good artists are channeling something almost unconsciously.